it'd be like, yes, it is, damn it. And so, I think when you approach it from that standpoint, and you see Pete, I mean, he said he's been coaching, I counted it's his 47th year.
Right, he said about 50 years.
He said he was coaching when he was 13,
yeah.
But, this is number 26 for him in the NFL. And I think Pete gets the players more than any other coach. And the thing is, on this, you had to be together as a team. And I think that's the best thing that he's done is that, I went through this, this situation my rookie year, totally different, but it was about, going on strike. And I remember my agent, a very wise man named Marvin Demoff, he said, how you feel about it doesn't matter. Go along with your team and you'll get bonds. And and then the late 80s we had some of the tightest, best teams that leadership was Jacob Green, Dave Craig, guys from the South, guys from the West Coast, black guys, white guys, everybody. Was the tightest team because we hung together through that. And so I think that this team will be stronger because of it. So just a very impassioned speech there by Pete. I thought he was going to break down a couple times. You could tell that it was entirely coming from his heart. And like he said, start with love, and compassion. And it's I mean, I understand that there are people that they don't want politics maybe with their sports, but it's gotten to a point now where it can't be ignored. So I thought Pete handled that pretty well, and I liked a lot of the things that he said. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of what effect does this make this a tighter team going forward, and what kind of a change that this can affect.
And this isn't the first time that they have had a discussion similar to this. I mean, a couple of months ago, via Zoom at least, they spent a couple of days devoting specifically to the murder of George Floyd. And now this issue pops up this week. Carroll saying, quote, "This is a humanity issue. Our players are screaming at us. Can you hear me? Can you feel me? They just want to be accepted like our white families want to be. It's no different because we are all the same. They are frightened for their lives. They're frightened for their children's lives and their loved ones' lives. They are crying out once again." And this is what we saw all throughout the sports world this week, with the NBA and NHL postponing playoff games, the WNBA canceling games as well, and even the Mariners postponing their game on Wednesday.
Yeah, so it's got everyone's attention.
Yes.
In other words.
How valuable is it to have a locker room that is open? Because you're an old school football guy. You just talked about that. How valuable is it to have an environment that allows the players to air their grievances in the way that they have the last couple of weeks, last couple of months?
There's a lot of talk right now about that we need to have difficult conversations. There were lots of difficult conversations had. And I always felt like everybody pretty much knew where their heart was coming from, and so, you can dissent in this country. I, heard a great quote once that this country's complicated and it's difficult. And if you truly want freedom and democracy, you have to be willing to fight for somebody's right to say something that makes your blood boil.
Right.
So, there are different opinions coming together, but I just felt like it always was more well done in the locker room. Those difficult conversations were had. And this is a pretty tight team, and one of the reasons why is because of Pete Carroll and his leadership. So again, I don't think that there's a coach that's better at bringing players together, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of free agents want to come here.
And here is a universal message that I believe everybody should adopt, and this isn't one that's politicized. It's the fact that racism has to be out the door. It's got to be gone. That's what Pete Carroll said. And we need to figure out a way to get that done, how to affect change. And there's not an organization out there, I don't believe, that has been as out front on this issue as the Seahawks have been, as you date back to the 2017 season when Doug Baldwin and the leadership of that team put together an action fund that could help affect change within our communities.
Right, and one of the reasons why, and look, I don't want to bring it back to football just yet, but one of the reasons why Pete has had so much success there is because he has given everyone a voice and everybody an opportunity. Remember before the Tennessee game a few years ago when there was the kneeling for the anthem, and they had like a 1-2 hour meeting before they went out on the field. So, and they're allowed to do those kinds of things. And look, I could understand an old school coach saying, "Hey guys, this is about football and everything," but happy players that feel like they have a voice are going to play better. And so I think Pete has always been the best at getting the most out of players, and even if they're maybe a little bit on the edge, one way or the other, he's always been about bringing the best out of individuals and out of teams. So again, I don't think that this is a difficult time right now for coaches. And really, I mean, you talk about the COVID-19 situation, you talk about this charged situation. The NFL is 75% African-American, and it's here. It's a real thing. But having to go through all of these things and try to get ready for a season, I think this is going to be by far Pete's most difficult coaching job. But I'll bet you at the end of the year, it's going to be his most rewarding job.
Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson saying yesterday on 710 ESPN that if they had a game this week, they probably would not play. And that would go along with a number of other boycotts throughout other leagues. We're going to have much more here on Seahawks Training Camp Live. Likely no practice today, but we do have some football to talk about, which we will get to. Our Ian Furness also standing by live at the VMAC in Renton. Much more coming up next on Q13 FOX and Seahawks.com. Back here on Seahawks Training Camp Live, where training camp practice has presumably been canceled today. Let's head out to the Seahawks facility, the VMAC in Renton, and join our Ian Furness. Ian?
Aaron, thank you very much. Yeah, obviously there will be no practice today. We've seen a couple of cars leave the facility behind us. The gate's still closed and field access is still not there for us and for none of the media. But I want to go back as we wait and find out maybe what the next step is in the process. I think the next question is, will they practice tomorrow? Will they're scheduled to have a mock game here? And football aside, I think a couple of things stood out. And Dave mentioned the game in Tennessee 3 years ago in 2017 against the Tennessee Titans in Nashville. And I'll never forget that day, because as I watch Pete Carroll today, probably more emotional than we've ever seen Pete Carroll. And obviously we know the work he's done in the inner city in Los Angeles and what Pete Carroll is all about. And the issues of the day certainly striking close to home for him. But if I go back to Nashville, Tennessee in September of 2017, And that was the Sunday after some remarks were made by President Trump that certainly upset a lot of football players and frankly, black people across the country, but certainly the NFL. And the Saturday night prior to that game, the Seahawks as a team, normally, as Dave can know so well, that is some very, very critical time to have the final meetings, walkthroughs, preparations, positional group meetings, etc. That particular night, I was told by an assistant coach prior to the game on the field that the Seahawks didn't do anything football related that Saturday night prior to that game with the Tennessee Titans. Instead, they met as a team and discussed the issues at hand. And obviously the makeup of the team was very different at the time, but you know some of the players that were involved. Some players that were very outspoken and very forthright and really, I think, in a lot of ways, leaders in the National Football League in terms of social justice issues. And they didn't talk about football that night. Instead, they talked about all those other issues and what to do the next day. They talked to the Tennessee Titans, and the Titans says, we'll follow your lead. And if you remember what happened on that Sunday morning, the Seahawks did not come out of the locker room for the national anthem. They were the first NFL team to do so. No one knelt, no one was kneeling, no one was sitting. Instead, what they did is they stayed in the locker room, and the Tennessee Titans did the exact same thing. The anthem was over. The players, both teams, walked out separate tunnels, and they played the football game. And I bring up that story because as I was talking to an assistant coach on the field, it was an interesting dynamic because while there sure was some frustration for the football side of him, at the same time, he said, not many head coaches would allow that to happen. But Pete Carroll was that head coach. And instead of talking football that day, instead what they did is they talked about the issues at hand. That's why when I saw Pete Carroll today, I knew how real and true his words were. The Seahawks did not win that football game, and in the long run, probably it didn't matter because who Pete Carroll is as a coach and as a man, I think, and as a leader, and as he challenged other coaches around the NFL today, I think we saw that through and through. And that's just kind of what resonated with me today, guys, is that day in Tennessee, that hot, humid day, and everything that took place in the 12, 14 hours leading up to that football game. Pete Carroll led the way, had no problem with his players doing something other than football on a night that is normally, as Dave can tell you, is reserved for nothing but football. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Ian. And talking about that Tennessee game, I mean, it was a game that the Seahawks lost, and clearly they weren't focused. Their minds were on other things. I mean, taking that team meeting, as Ian talked about, Pete Carroll has been in this industry forever as a coach. One of the reasons is because he listens to the players. Yeah. And that was different than sort of the old school coaching. He goes back to his old days as a defensive backs coach at the University of Pacific, where his coach was like, head coach at the time was like, what? No, don't listen to your players. I mean, that's the last thing you want to do. Yeah. Pete has found his own philosophy, and that is listening and empathizing with his players. And this kind of extends to what we're talking about now. And Ian mentioned the calling that he has for all coaches throughout the league to take that leadership opportunity and to address all the situations that we can address with our players.
Yeah, and the thing that's interesting about Pete is that, they say the older you get, the more set in your ways you become. And I feel like Pete has actually gone the other way and listened to that. So, yeah, some of the other things. Are we gonna head out? We got something. I have a radio show, and there's a lot of people that they don't want politics with their sports, and so, but right now, as far as the players and the coaches go, I don't think, you have a choice right now. It's something that's, like I said before, it's here. And, sometimes people are trying to escape those kinds of things and just, have sports. And I think the players have kind of, heard that message, and they're ready to go ahead and go forth with their platforms. And so, and that may come at, there's always the question, at what cost? It may come at a cost, but the players are willing to do that. And Pete, like I said, probably the best coach in the league that is listens to players. And I told a story about some of the friends that I had at Stanford, and African-American players who would say things, and I heard it, but I don't think I listened. And that's what Pete's talking about. And I actually called a couple of my old teammates and just talked to them about that. There were places that you couldn't go, and people that you couldn't date and things like that. And I heard it, but I'm not sure I listened. And right. So that's the one thing I think, if just that comes out of this. But yeah, it's like I said, it's here. The players very active here. Nobody giving them a better platform than Pete Carroll.
And Pete Carroll saying these players are screaming for our attention here. And to that very point, and the argument behind why they're using that platform, here's what Quandre Diggs had to say yesterday.
I applaud those guys. You know what I mean? I applaud the NBA players, the WNBA players, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? MLB, all those guys that were able to take a stand and, you know what I mean, just shut the world down for, you know what I mean, even if it was that day, that made a statement. You know what I mean? It's crazy times in this world, and you know what I mean, at some point as athletes, as entertainers, you know what I mean, it's our job to let people know, you know what I mean, we're more than entertainers, we're more than athletes, and we have families outside of this. You know what I mean, my whole family's black, so at the end of the day, I'm scared for them every day. You know what I mean, I call my mom every day, no matter if I'm a multimillionaire or not, she worries about me each and every day. So you know, I have nothing but respect for those guys, and I think as a league, as the NFL, you know what I mean, we got to come together and we got to figure out what our message is going to be, and just continue to keep the voices going and keep the movement going, and don't let our voices not be heard. We got to continue to let it go.
Again, that Seahawks safety Quandre Diggs. Practice, by the way, has officially been canceled today, so hopefully they'll be back on the field. They were scheduled for a mock game tomorrow. The note that he said, we are more than entertainers. And this is one of the reasons why they are deciding to use the platform for what they believe in. And you can't knock them for that because, I mean, enough is enough in their view. I mean, something has to be done in terms of racism in this country.
Yeah, and, you know, it's just, it's difficult for these guys to just turn a blind eye to it. So, and I think, you know, it's finally gotten to a point, again, that it's here. You know, going back to the locker room thing, I think one of my favorite athletes, ex-athletes of all time, is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And originally, what he said in the very beginning, he said, you know, go and, you know, build a relationship with somebody that doesn't look like you. And for those of us that have been blessed to be in the sports world, you didn't really have to make an effort to go do that. It just happened because of the diversity in a football locker room. And I just thought that was one of the wiser things that I've ever heard. And so, yeah, it's that's something that needs to get out there. I think Pete talked about that. And then obviously Quandre Diggs talking about something that the players just felt that they no longer could ignore.
Pete also talking about today that the players are not going to all deal with this the same way, that some players want to speak out. Some players are more silent on the issue. Right. And players like Tyler Lockett, who we discussed yesterday, and I think hopefully we'll have the sound for coming up after this break, is he's decided that he wants to sort of build that bridge and be that bridge between the two sides. And that's very tough to do, especially in today's climate, but I'll definitely share his perspective coming up on the other side of the break here on Seahawks Training Camp Live on Q13 FOX and Seahawks.com. Back here on Seahawks Training Camp Live, practice officially canceled today in the wake of the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Let's head back to the facility, the VMAC in Renton, and rejoin our Ian Furness. Ian?
Well, Aaron, thanks. Yeah, we're still sitting outside the practice field because there are still some players that are on the field, not practicing, but just talking and meeting. And maybe we'd better take everybody back a little bit as to what took place today. With the COVID-19, the pandemic situation, and the ability or the want to try to socially distance everybody, and the locker room is set up far different than before, and having huge meetings is different and more difficult and challenging. Our understanding is the Seahawks as a team met on the berm outside, normally where the fans are. They were able to be separate out there, and as they met today, they had a long conversation that obviously went even longer than we had anticipated. And then we heard from Pete Carroll a short time ago, but those conversations have indeed continued. Again, there's still some players on the field right now having conversations and talking about the issues at hand. So just kind of want to take everybody back through exactly what happened today. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This wasn't a knee-jerk thing. There's been a lot of conversations taking place in amongst the team, and obviously you heard the passionate words from Pete Carroll just a few moments ago. So there are players still out there talking and meeting as we speak. One other note that I think jumps off the page at me a little bit today, and that is what Pete Carroll said towards the end of his news conference, and that was that every player by the end of today is going to be registered to vote. And I think it's been mentioned, a few guys saying, hey, we just registered for the first time, and understanding the need, if you want to elicit change, how voting has to take place and being active in that process. And Pete Carroll mentioned that for those of us, obviously, that aren't players, but knowing that all of his players now will be registered to vote, very encouraging as well. And Dave, you mentioned it. You and I both do radio shows. We're on competing stations, but the one thing we have in common is this: politics and sports, social issues in sports. It's going to mix all season long, certainly in the NFL, and I think today here in Seattle is just the start, guys.
You raise a great point, Ian, and that's specifically that every member of the Seahawks roster going to register to vote, whether they had or not prior to now. And it's a fundamental liberty in a democracy, right, is the right to vote. And Quandre Diggs yesterday said that he had never registered to vote before. He's 27 years old. And so the maturity that he has gone through over the course of the last 4 years since the last presidential election, he is going and he is registering to vote, making his voice heard as well.
Right, and there will be people voting on both sides, and it's something that everybody should do. And why would you not get registered and vote? So, yeah, it's the thing I wanted to also add, and just talking about what Ian was talking about as far as you're going to have to talk about those kinds of things. It's made it kind of difficult for me and personally, but it's something that I feel like I've tried to keep the conversation going and, do it in a way where, you get people kind of used to the fact that it's just going to go hand in hand. That's the world that we live in right now. And the other thing I would say is that you mentioned Tyler Lockett. What a great group of character guys they have on this team. I mean, you start off with Russell Wilson, who in my mind, Russ can just do no wrong, everything he says. And then, Bobby Wagner, who I've gotten to know. We used to do a roofing commercial together, and he's just a good, soft-spoken, intelligent guy that just has a lot of passion and feeling, and then some of the elder statesmen like Dwayne Brown, and then some of the rookies like DK Metcalf. Just what a fantastic man. And I hope those guys, a lot of times they'll say, well, I'm not just a football player.
Yeah.
And I'm much more than that. I think really good Seahawk fans already know that. And I think that's part of it. I've always felt that way, that here in Seattle, that people really care about the character of a player more than, I won't name names, but, sometimes when there's a talk of signing a guy that might be a problem in the locker room, at least the feedback we get on our radio show is that, hey, everything's nice and peaceful, and it's such a great group of guys.
And the leadership is strong.
Very
so
strong.
Even if they were to bring somebody like that in, that the leadership in that locker room is strong, and that would be the other side, obviously, the argument.
Yeah, you would like to think so. Yeah, but no, that is a good argument. That and I think that's why Pete has brought some more controversial figures and allowed guys to expand because of the leadership, and it all starts with Pete. Look, he's the guy that really sets the tone. But I just wanted to mention some of those really good guys, Luke Wilson. he's in a crowded tight end room right now. Couldn't love that guy anymore. And so, you have all of those guys working together, and we're just kind of getting to know Greg Olson coming in here. Talked to Carlos Hyde the other day. I mean, just all high character guys. And, so the challenge is going to be, having to skip these practices, and, some of the things, maybe they skip a game, they're not able to do OTAs, they're not able to do preseason games, but I feel like their character and the leadership that's going on, they have a lot of really good veteran leaders and a good mix of young guys. Trey Flowers is another guy I would just, that I've talked to a number of times. It just high character, awesome leadership. The Griffin twins, of course, and so that's the good thing that's going on with this group of players in particular.
The message that we've heard so often is put yourself in my shoes, not me, the football player, not me in a uniform, but me as a human being.
Yeah.
And walk in my shoes, or put yourself in a position of walking in my shoes for one day. And that's part of the message that Tyler Lockett was trying to talk about in discussing his attempt to build a bridge between two sides. We live in a fractured society, especially politically, but you focused on sort of bridging that gap. What does that mean to you, and how have you been able to do that?
I think bridging the gap is just getting people to understand that you might be on one side of the road, but that doesn't mean that what you see is necessarily the truth about any and everybody in their life. There's different people that see different things, and who's to say that what you see is right or that's the way that it goes. And so it's being able to try to bridge the gap to get them to understand, to get them to try to listen. But you don't want to talk to somebody that's like a brick wall. You want to talk to somebody that's willing to listen because they don't understand, or they never was taught to understand, or they were taught things that were different. And it's just being able to get them to understand. Sometimes they think things are justified because the media says something. Other times they think things are justified because they think they were a bad person. But they don't realize that even their favorite players go through similar things when they're off the field and people don't know their names. Like, they don't realize the effects that it has when you do get pulled over by cops. They don't realize the effect it has of when we're driving in the car. If we see a cop, we're going to keep looking. And if we pass them, we look in the rear view mirror and we try to go a long distance to see if they move before we keep focusing on the road. Like, these are things that we focus on when we see that people like that are African Americans are dying. Like, it's hard for people to understand that if they never even tried to care or even figure out why or what's going on. So it's just being able to have those conversations, trying to find ways to bridge the gap. And for some, bridging the gap isn't for them. It's protesting, or for others, it's being able to make sure everybody's aware of what's going on. But it takes, certain people to be able to figure out what's my role in this. And I felt like my role is to try to bridge the gap, and I'm trying to do that as best as I can.
Absolutely commendable efforts from Seahawks wide receiver Tyler Lockett. We're going to have much more coming up next on Seahawks Training Camp Live on Q13 FOX and Seahawks.com. What are the challenges now? I mean, obviously, it has been one of the most difficult challenges in coaching within a pandemic with all the Zoom meetings this offseason. Now you add the social issues to the mix. And I shouldn't say we're adding it now because this has been prominent for the last 4 or 5 months and dating back to last season and previous seasons as well. Right. But given those two huge challenges, what can Pete Carroll and his coaching staff continue to do in order to optimize their performance on the field and balance that with the players speaking out?
Well, and first
and
of all,
coaches speaking out as well.
Yeah, sure. And also this kind of goes back for Pete to 2017.
Right.
So I mean, look, I guess he's got that experience because he was addressing it back then before other coaches were. My heart goes out to the coaches. It's difficult for those guys. It really is. And this is getting more on the football side, but it's one of the reasons why I think they did a really good job, John Schneider and Pete Carroll, of signing seasoned veterans, because it's going to be difficult for the young guys. And those are the guys I feel for. The younger undrafted free agents that aren't getting, the preseason games and the OTAs, and now you're missing practices and possibly a game. If this is going to be protested later on. So it's just really hard for the coaches. I mean, they want players that they know they can count on. And it's hard to get, see all the reps. Again, we're talking more technical about football stuff right now. But also, I think emotionally, it's, the Seahawks have a fair number of African-American coaches as well. And so, yeah, it's something that everybody's going through, and it's incredibly difficult. But again, I just think Pete has always done such a good job. Everybody talks about Belichick, and look, you can't deny the wins, but I just think the way being a coach, yeah, it's about winning, but it's also about getting the best out of your players. And I don't think you can say there's anybody. I mean, I'll compare Belichick and Carroll. If Belichick doesn't like somebody, they're gone. He ends up cutting them. And Pete wraps his arms around those types of players and gets the most out of them. So, but yeah, difficult job for the coaches. Those guys work so hard. I thought about going into coaching until my 9th year in the league. I left at the facility at 6 o'clock. You'd see the coaches' lights on up in there. So they sometimes sleep in their offices looking at film. You get there, they're there the next morning at 6 a.m. I mean, it's a really tough job for those guys, and it's gotten a lot more challenging with the things that have happened here in 2020.
Well, following today's team meeting and the discussions that they were having on the berm, according to Ian Furness, let's head back out to the VMAC and rejoin Ian. Ian?
Well, Aaron, along the lines we've been discussing throughout the afternoon here, and just the culture here at the VMAC and with the Seahawks organization since 2010 when John Schneider and Pete Carroll arrived here, I found this interesting. Jamal Adams, who obviously one of the newer Seahawks and a Seahawk who comes here with credentials like no other, a 2-time All-Pro, second team and first team last year, and he tweeted out just about 8 minutes ago, and I'll read it verbatim. Big thank you to Coach Pete, John Schneider, and the entire Seahawks organization for really hearing us as black athletes. This is a special place, like I've said before, where everyone's willing to learn and understand that wrong is wrong and right is right. I think some powerful words there from Jamal Adams coming in from the outside. I think it also speaks volumes as to why this is an organization that you see players come back to. And you don't see that all that often in sports, where someone leaves an organization and ends up finding their way back to that organization again. But we have seen that time and time again with Pete Carroll and John Schneider and the Seahawks willing to bring people back. I'm sure it's a two-way street. They're familiar with the players, but the players are familiar with them as well. I just talked to Bruce Irvin the other day on the radio about exactly that, and he really kind of emphasized how leaving here and going and making 3 other stops, how he truly appreciated what they have here in Seattle. And it's not just this great facility, it's not just the great fan base, certainly those two at the top of the list, but alongside of that is the culture and the fact that you have a coach and a general manager and an atmosphere here that allows players to be themselves and to, if they want to speak out on issues, which is going to be the most important thing we're going to hear, as Pete said, for the next 60 days leading up to Election Day, you're given that freedom to do so. And not every, certainly, organization is like that, but that's the case here. And great words from Jamal Adams, and Bruce Irvin, I think, would agree as well.
Absolutely. Ian said, Bruce Irvin, quote, "Nothing has been like Seattle. They run it right up there. Everything is grade A." And a lot of the things that Ian Furness was just talking about as well. We're going to react to that coming up on the other side of the break here on Seahawks Training Camp Live on Seahawks.com and Q13 FOX. And the fields at the VMAC are empty today, with practice originally scheduled this afternoon. Instead, like many other teams this week, the Seahawks have decided to take a pause in the wake of the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. And here's part of what Pete Carroll had to say earlier today.
This is a really big day around the country. It happens to be Jackie Robinson Day. Happens to be the day after Chadwick Boseman passed away, who portrayed and taught all of our young people about Jackie Robinson in the story in the new movie that they put out, which has been extraordinary. And it's just been a really big day in a lot of ways. And so I want to talk to you guys about some stuff that's on my heart. And because of the environment that I live in here and work with our guys, it kind of starts here. I've been coaching for a really long time. I mean, I've been coaching since I was 13 years old. I was coaching Pop Warner kids. So that's over 50 years. And I've had the good fortune of spending a career in the midst of an environment and a culture that isn't normal for the outside world. We've been in a world of diversity forever, and as far as I can go back. And so I've had the good fortune of different lessons than other people have had. And with all of those years, I've never learned more than I've learned really in the last 20 years in particular at SC and then here. But in particular, in just the last 6 or so years, with what we've gone through and what we've dealt with, has been just enlightening in so many ways. And it seemed like a lot of the years that I spent coaching, nothing really happened, didn't learn a whole lot. But in this last half dozen years or so, I've realized how crucial it is to keep growing and to keep learning and to keep competing to figure out how you can do things better. And that, and in essence, that everybody needs to continue. Everybody needs to be coached up ongoing. You know, we don't ever have it. We always have a chance to get better and to learn more and represent more specifically and all of that. And so, you know, I'm still curious. And as I stay curious, I keep growing and learning because of the environment and the people that I'm around. And I know in this world of coaching, there's a lot of coaches out there, men's and women's coaches in all different sports that are in leadership positions that really have an impact on a lot of people. And this is a calling today for all coaches, specifically to take that leadership opportunity and address all of the situations that we can address with our players and the people that are around the programs, at least there. At least I can touch on coaches and get to them, I think. And this summer we did a podcast. Steve Kerr and I did, really with the thought of, let's see if we can get on the topics that people aren't willing to talk about. Let's see if we can talk about race, and we can talk about diversity, and we can talk about inclusion, and let's see how far we could go with the guests that we had. We had a whole array of guests, and there was one day that it was Steve and Greg Popovich and myself. I thought, okay, this is three white guys talking to the world about what it's like to grow up and live in a world of diversity, and see if we couldn't share some of our experiences that we've had in our awareness of what people need and where they're coming from, and that other people that don't have the opportunity to be in that kind of environment might need to know. And in essence, we wanted to kind of enlighten and educate, if we could, based on the experiences that we had.
Again, that's Pete Carroll addressing the media at the beginning of today's press conference. He did not take questions from the media. It was part of about a 20-minute or 15-minute long statement in which you saw his passion. I mean, he was as emotional as we've seen him during his time as head coach, and talking about an ongoing evolution that he's still learning. I mean, he's going to be turning 69 years old in next month, and yet he's continuing to not only listen to his players, but evolve as a coach and a listener in general.
Right, and it's a good life lesson for anybody that's getting older. You know, they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but Pete has tried to learn and listen. One of the guys in this mix too that we've mostly talked about Pete. He's the leader. John Schneider is one of those guys that loves the players, and that's where he starts out. And that's my experience in the NFL is that, sometimes you'll hear coaches and management kind of badmouth players. You never hear that from, Pete Carroll especially, and certainly John Schneider. And so, Pete was talking about his long coaching career there. He was in Minnesota with Paul Wiggin, who was the guy that recruited me to Stanford.
Right.
And I know they coached together. And I remember Paul Wiggin one time, and I know him and Pete are a lot alike. He said, at the time it was talking about college football. He said, college football is not much of a show without the players. And it's the same thing in the NFL. And that's the way Schneider and Carroll both treat that. And John Schneider, I mean, everything you hear from him is just nothing but love and admiration for the players. And they feel that here. That is something that these players, and especially after today with Pete doing everything that he did today, I mean, I just think that that this is the best place to be in the NFL. And you hear it from the players. I mean, from the moment you walk into the VMAC where Jill Quinn is at the front desk and just the most lovely person ever, you walk in.
Always smile on her face.
Always, yeah. And that's the way, just the culture there. But culture gets set by guys like John Schneider and Pete Carroll.
Right.
And when you make it all about the players, because again, the NFL is not much of a show without the players. And so that's the sort of thread that runs through the Seahawks organization.
They care deeply about the players. I mean, if anything was going to show you that, it's exactly what Pete Carroll was talking about earlier today on the long diatribe that he made, and trying to emphasize the point that people need to listen. They need to empathize, and we need to rid this world of racism in general. We're going to have much more on this topic and also football as we look ahead to training camp, potentially a mock game scheduled for tomorrow at the VMAC on Seahawks Saturday night, later tonight, 9:30 on Joe TV, 10:30 on Q13 FOX. I caught up with new Seahawks running back Carlos Hyde. We'll be able to see that tonight as well. And then, of course, we'll have 3 training camp specials for you next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, live from the VMAC. It's Seahawks Training Camp Live here on Q13 FOX, your official Seahawks station, and Seahawks.com. Again, for Dave Wyman and Ian Furness, I'm Aaron Levine. We'll see you later tonight on Seahawks Saturday Night.